Hey everyone, welcome back to the Collector's Compass, the official podcast of Collectors MD, where we explore the intersection of collecting, mental wellness, and responsible engagement across the modern hobby and beyond. I'm your host, Alyx Efron, founder of Collectors MD, and today's episode is an important one because it sits right at the intersection of access, influence, and responsibility in a hobby that remains largely unregulated. I'm joined today by my good friend, Jeremy Lee, host of Sports Card Live, creator of the Hobby Spectrum platform, and author whose work focuses on understanding collector behavior across a wide range of engagement styles. Jeremy also sits on the Collectors MD advisory board, bringing real-world insight, lived experience, and thoughtful perspective to the work we're doing as a movement. Many people know Jeremy as a hobby media voice, but what stands out to me is that he hasn't just observed the hobby, he's thoughtfully and strategically mapped it out. Through his weekly show, his writing, and the Hobby Spectrum platform, he spent years noticing that collectors don't all experience this space the same way, even when they're interacting with the same mechanics. This episode isn't about blaming breakers, platforms, manufacturers, or even collectors for the current state of the hobby. It's about understanding how modern hobby systems shape behavior and why awareness matters before regulation arrives. At Collectors MD, we talk a lot about how healthier systems lead to healthier behavior, and Jeremy's work aligns closely with that belief, giving people language, frameworks, and tools to better understand where they stand without shame or judgment. Jeremy, I really appreciate you joining me today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Alyx. I appreciate what you're doing for the hobby. It's very, very important, and creating awareness for what you're doing is, I just think it's wonderful. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive in, do you want to just give our audience a little bit of background, just in terms of, your collecting journey, everything that's gotten you to where you are today in terms of hosting a very popular weekly show, launching the Hobby Spectrum platform, as well as writing a book? And you don't have to go into too much detail because we're going to touch on each one of those in a bit here, but just to sort of set the table.
I'm 46 years in the hobby this year. The hobby is truly my life outside of my family, and I've done a bunch of things within it. Collecting, set collecting in the 80s. I had a card shop in the early 90s during the junk wax era. I've been involved in hobby message board forums. I started my YouTube channel in April 2020, just at the beginning of the pandemic. I've done over 800 episodes on there, almost exclusive live streams. And the Hobby Spectrum came about because of the Sports Cards Live content. I often talk about, I'll do this on my show, you got collectors here, you've got investors here. We all fit somewhere along this collector-investor spectrum. And one night on a late night walk after a Saturday night episode of Sports Cards Live, I thought, why don't I see if there's a way to bring that thing I do with my hands out of the abstract and build a framework around it. And here we are about 9 months later or so, and it's been built, and I'm super proud of it and excited about it. And yeah, and then the book actually was a spin-off of it, and I can tell you a lot more about it, but that brings us to today.
Awesome. Yeah, 800 episodes. That's absolutely wild to hear. I mean, we're on episode 29 of the Collector's Compass. Obviously, this is something I started within the last year, but even that feels like a lot. So 800 episodes, that's really, really impressive. And yeah, the Hobby Spectrum platform is amazing. I've already started to navigate it, interact with it, and I'm really excited to talk about it. And of course, your book, that's something that we'll touch on too. So we're going to dive in. Our first segment is called The Moment Awareness Became Responsibility. So I want to start with your personal journey in the hobby. When did you first realize that collecting wasn't one size fits all, that different people were having very different experiences?
I mean, like, I started as a kid at 8 years old, but the earliest memory I really have of, well, first of all, I'd go to the card shops in the mid 80s, on Saturdays with my friend, and I'd be looking at some cards and other people would be looking at other cards. So right there, you realize that some people collected baseball, some basketball, some football, some hockey. But really, I think I started setting up at card shows in 2005, specifically the Toronto Expo. And as I was behind the booth, people would come up to the booth and I would just be so curious what they were doing. I didn't really, I wasn't always trying to sell them something. I would kind of wonder, like, what do you collect? I'd see them holding some cards in their hand, or they'd have a box under their arm. And I would kind of just be curious what was in there. And so I started asking the question to people, maybe not in these exact words, but like, how do you approach the hobby? And that was when I started having these conversations show after show. And it was just fascinating to me that my approach was one of many, 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 close to infinite. So that's kind of how I realized that that we don't all collect the same way.
Yeah. Were these people like younger? Were they adults? Were they kids?
All ages. All ages.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of the hobby, is that, it brings in people from all walks of life, different places of the world, different age groups. It's a childhood hobby, but it's also obviously become increasingly popular amongst adults. It's a great space. And the idea here is that we want it to be as healthy, safe, and sustainable as possible for the foreseeable future. So I think you and I see eye to eye there. And between both of our platforms, we're doing a lot of work in this space to make sure that happens. And so you've had a front row seat through your show, Sports Cards Live. And, you've been having conversations with industry leaders and respected voices in the hobby, chat reactions. I love that you engage with the people that are, consuming the content live. That's always, a really great way to bring people in. And you've talked about a lot of recurring themes. So did hosting that show change how you viewed your role in the hobby?
Somewhat, I suppose. I didn't set out to do it, but after doing my show, I was one of the early content creators. And there were guys that started in the 2010s, but I was one of the first people to do live streams regularly. And I quickly realized that, because people were telling me that they enjoyed it. And then I started kind of getting feedback that made me, it was an uncomfortable sort of feeling, but that, people are listening to you and your voice matters. And it was a strange sort of phenomenon to undertake. But as the years have gone by and I keep on receiving feedback like that, I know that my words do carry some weight, because there are thousands of people listening and watching. And so yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you really want to watch yourself. You don't want to let it go to your head. You don't want to overuse any of that reach or that influence you may have. I don't like the word influencer. I mean, I know it's a functional word, but I kind of prefer the word inspirer. And I know that I've inspired people to collect different things in different ways, and that's I take a lot of pride in that. I think that's a nice way to approach things, but influence has a negative connotation to me. So I try not to, wield that sword at all. I'd rather just inspire people to collect the way that works for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're very aware that when you have any level of reach in this hobby, even if it's modest, like where Collectors MD sits today, there's a responsibility that comes with it. Right? Like Collectors MD isn't huge. We're still growing, but we take seriously the idea that we say, what we say, normalize and encourage, can shape how people, especially young collectors, engage with the hobby. So, we try to lead with care, humility, and intention, knowing influence isn't about size, it's about impact. And so when you sit in a position like yourself where you're reaching thousands of people, that impact becomes even more monumental. So being self-aware of that and just knowing that your message carries significant impact, it's so incredibly important. And I think a lot of people, not just within the hobby, but across the entire world, when it comes to being in like a position of power, just having a public position or voice in a large space, people can do a better job of that holistically. So was there a point where your role as the host of Sports Cards Live stopped feeling like you were just producing content and started to feel like a responsibility?
I mean, sort of. The pandemic was an interesting time. A lot of people were spending time alone, and I knew that, and I was just people were telling me that thank you for what you're doing because you're helping me pass the time, building a community, having people to interact with, even though it's digitally and online in the chat. I did feel like I was providing a place for people to be and have some social interaction. Uh, so the but creating content, it's content creation, and live streams are interesting as opposed to pre-recorded videos because there's really no there really is, and we talked about this before we went live, but I believe there doesn't need to be any post-production work. Once it's done, you're done. You can wipe your hands off it and move on to the next project, and I've been doing that for almost 6 years now.
Right.
So it's content, but it's also just conversational, and I think that the word content is becoming blurred, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that it's blurred because you can create content in so many ways, and anyone who has a social media account that puts themselves out there with their thoughts and opinions is a content creator. Even a Twitter account is a content creator. An Instagram account is a content creator. So we're all creating content. It just comes down to how big is your reach, and how seriously do you take it, I suppose.
Yeah. That the whole concept really matters. Because once you see the spectrum clearly, it's hard to pretend that everyone is standing in the same place, or all collectors are on the same path or following the same journey. Some people in the hobby, casually, some of them are casually engaging with it. Some are deeply invested emotionally or financially, and some are a lot closer to the edge than they realize. And the tricky part is they're often all interacting with the same products, the same platforms, the same content. And so when you recognize that, especially as a content creator, it changes how you think about responsibility. It doesn't mean you stop enjoying the hobby or trying to deter people away from it, or that everything needs to be sanitized, so to speak. It just means you can't assume one approach works for everyone, right? Awareness forces you to slow down and ask who might be affected, not just who's having fun in the moment. So with that, we're going to switch over to our next segment, which is access, speed, and responsibility when systems shape behavior. So I want to talk about the systems themselves, the access, the speed, the environment. Why do you think accessibility often changes behavior more than intent?
Accessibility to what? To content or to product? What are we getting at here?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. The platforms have become so frictionless that anybody can join a live break, consume content, get involved at any time of the day, any time of the night, from the comfort of their own home, the couch, their bed, wherever, just using their smartphone.
Yeah, I mean, if you are an addict, I believe that accessibility is going to facilitate the addiction. So, I mean, it's it's interesting because I used to open up a lot of wax, and I realized that was, and it's not, my access was driving to the LCS. And I realized really early that I'm just burning money. So I stopped like 15 years ago. I basically stopped cold turkey. A little bit here and there, but not, I was never addicted to opening wax. However, I would open one box at the LCS, and then, you don't get much. Maybe you open another box. You open one box, you get something. You think you might be on a lucky day. You maybe open up another box. But I did have that under control. Where I find myself being a hobby addict is just with my phone. I mean, I'm opening this thing up, and I'm looking at all the different social platforms and the eBays and the Fanatics Collect apps, like all the time throughout the day. And I think I probably have a bit of a problem with just my phone. But it's also what I do. I also kind of need it
Right.
to run, my hobby activities that are what I do for a living now. So, but with that said, yeah, accessibility is it's not it doesn't I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's helpful for when you're trying to if you're dealing with it with a real issue. So I don't know if that answers your question really, but if you want to redirect me, I'm happy to take another stab at it.
Yeah, no, you covered some really great points there. I think the smartphones and the constant access, it's really a double-edged sword, right? You mentioned we rely on them for connection, for information, for convenience, even community. Like, not just in terms of being a content creator, that's a whole nother layer, but just the average consumer, the average person needs their smartphone for all those things. And the modern hobby wouldn't function the way it does without them today, but that same sort of accessibility can also work against us, right? When everything is just always available, it removes that friction. There's no pause, there's no natural stopping point, there's no time for your emotions to settle before you make your next decision, whether that's, just a decision to open up Instagram and start doom scrolling or purchase a couple $100 card. What used to require effort, like going to the LCS, now takes literally a tap on the screen. It doesn't necessarily make people weak, when they fall for those sort of traps, or they get sucked in, or they start to become addicted. It just makes them human, right? These tools they're really powerful, and when they're paired with things like speed, money, and emotional triggers, they can just start to quietly push behavior faster than your own intuition, your own intention can keep up. And so again, that's why awareness matters. That's why it's so important. It's not about, rejecting access, it's about respecting its impact. So again, you brought up some really great points going to the LCS, having limited hours, right? I mean, an LCS is only open a certain number of hours during the day. Like, you can't go there at 2 a.m., right? Physical pauses, being able to stop yourself completely. Now we just have this 24/7 access, instant entry, constant prompts. So how does that shift behavior even for the most disciplined collectors?
Well, so what you just reminded me of was I remember when like the eBay app was a new thing, even the smartphones coming out in around like the '08 era, and all of a sudden you could see these cards on your phone. I remember going to an NHL hockey game, and in the past you would need your desktop or your laptop computer with you and a connection to the internet, uh, and here I was sitting at the hockey game, scrolling eBay, bidding on and buying cards while I'm at a hockey game, and I should be focused on the event I'm at.
Right.
You're sitting at red lights. I mean, listen, looking at your saved searches on eBay and looking at Instagram at your hobby account. So how does accessibility change behavior? It's changed more. I think it's changed lifestyle more than just behavior. It's behaviors, it's habits, it's all it's very powerful, Alex. Like it's changed the way that we live,
Right.
especially if what you love, which for us is the hobby, is so it fits in so perfectly, so well on these little devices that it's completely changed how we live.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah, not just how we consume content and make purchasing decisions, but also, like you said, how we live. Like, our lives are fundamentally changed because of technology. And that's, a scary thing to think about, especially as technology continues to advance. What's
Yeah.
the world going to look like in a decade from now? 20 years from now, 50 years from now. That's why implementing a lot of this education and awareness is just so incredibly important, so that people can slow down, take a step back, recalibrate, and remind themselves the magnitude of a lot of these decisions that they're making. So I also want to talk about breaking and breaking culture, because this is where nuance matters. Breaking isn't inherently evil, but it isn't neutral either. So how do you think about the difference between ethical entertainment and exploitative dynamics?
I mean, it comes down to a couple of things for me. One is, salesmanship, transparency, and the willingness of the breaker, who's also the entertainer, to try to finesse more and more money out of their viewers and customers, which might not be good for those human beings who are part of the hobby. We want this hobby to last for decades and maybe even centuries. And if breakers are approaching their business from a perspective of, let's just get as much money as we can right now from whoever and not worry about it. As I was saying that, I started to think about all these scammers in foreign countries who are trying to rip off, they come at, here in Canada, they tell you they work for the Canada Revenue Agency, our IRS.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's very similar scams down in the United States as well. They don't care. They don't care. They don't care who the victim is. If breakers don't care about their customers, I think that's like, those are breakers that I would not support. I would actually, do the opposite of support and say, like, just don't, these are guys not to do business with, not to buy break spots from. So salesmanship, it's business, Alex, and everybody, a lot of these people are in business to make money, not to support the hobby. But I think there are some good breakers out there as well. So, if you have to cut people off, I think you have to, if you are aware of your customers and you might know that some of them have a tendency to overspend, I think it's just like a bar serving alcohol. You should take that responsibility and think about that. I think it's just the right thing to do. So that's sort of the salesmanship side of it, and then transparency is a tough one for me to really get my head around. As far as, I think that transparency is not enough. I think you can be transparent about pack odds and the fact that you may purchase a break spot for $300 and you may have a 3% chance of getting something good. It's nice to tell your customers that, to lay out that expectation, but is that enough? I just don't know that transparency is enough to get the blessing of the people who want this hobby to last forever. And what can we do to go above? What is enough? It's a great question. I need to think about it further, but I think it's not being predatory. I think predatory is the word I was getting at earlier. Predatory practices are rampant in the hobby right now, and I don't think that saying, "Oh, we're transparent with our break odds," or even on the repack side, we're transparent with the hit rates. I don't think the transparency is your get out of jail free card.
Yeah, some really, really sharp points there. And I do want to be crystal clear here. We don't think that every breaker is inherently predatory or evil or has malicious intent. Most are just simply following what works, what's popular, and what the market, rewards, right? And so in an unregulated environment, that becomes the framework. The problem is that without guardrails or shared standards around transparency, the pricing, the odds, the pacing, the escalation, the velocity, and the hype of the environment naturally tends to win. Not because people are malicious, but because effectiveness, again, gets rewarded. So when transparency is missing and regulation doesn't exist and there are no guardrails, the responsibility ends up shifting onto the individuals to self-regulate inside systems that are quite literally designed and engineered to move fast and to pull you in. And so that imbalance is where I think the risk starts to grow. So where do you think responsibility realistically begins and ends for breakers, platforms, and collectors?
Well, it's, part of my brain does say, that you should be responsible for your own behaviors. And, and that's a tough position to take in the world of addiction, because addicts cannot govern their behaviors as effectively as non-addicts. I believe that to be the case. And I say that with a question mark because I might not understand that perfectly. Responsibility, it's tough. It's tough because I think the best model to mirror is the casino model. A lot of people are calling the online breaking platforms as online casinos. They're not referring to them as online breaking platforms. They are literally referring to them as online casinos, and it's hard to dispute that because a lot of the people buying on there, I don't think they're necessarily buying to get cards of their favorite player or teams. I think they're literally buying for the thrill of watching the entertainment and watching that breaker yell and scream when a big hit comes out with their team, even though that big hit might not nearly cover the cost of entry. So I think responsibility is, man, I mean, that's a tough one. I think there needs to be a framework built around it. I think that that breakers there should be some sort of association or something, a set of standards that they should adhere to. And because we want to protect the sanctity of the hobby, and I don't know, like you said earlier, I think in the intro, as regulation is coming, I don't know that regulation is the right thing for the hobby. I don't know that it isn't either. I'm just saying I don't know that it is. And self-regulation might be a good way to avoid government regulation. As soon as government regulation happens, the whole cost of the ecosystem goes up. The cost of everything is going to go up with government regulation, because now you need to abide by that, and that costs money. And then you're going to need to people are going to need to be paid to monitor these things and regulate. So I think the responsibility falls to everybody. I think the responsibility falls to the business owners, the breaking company owners, the breakers themselves, and the customers to some degree too. Some breaking customers likely are not as addicted as others are, so they may have an easier time regulating themselves.
Yeah. I think personal responsibility. You brought up some really great points there. So personal responsibility obviously matters. Controlling your choices, setting boundaries, taking ownership of your actions are all paramount when you're an adult and you have responsibilities and you have obligations to a family and things like that. But that idea gets more complicated when we're talking about addiction, just like you said, especially gambling addiction, which, by the way, for those listening, is recognized as a disease, not a moral failure, right? Gamblers Anonymous in the Yellow Book, which we use during GA meetings, which is a 12-step program, it defines gambling addiction as a disease that destroys from the inside out. So in addiction, the brain's reward system is altered. Decisions aren't always coming from a calm, rational place. They're often driven by things like urgency, emotion, hype, distorted risk assessment. That's why telling somebody to just stop cold turkey or have more self-control misses what actually is happening neurologically, right? So like casinos understand this extremely well. They're designed around speed, accessibility, variable rewards, and emotional highs, all of which are what keep people engaged longer than they initially had intended. And what's uncomfortable is that many of these same dynamics again now exist in the hobby in terms of breaking, these rapid cycles, these near misses, social pressure, hype, right? It's all there, the constant availability. So yes, individuals are definitely, especially adults, are definitely responsible for their choices, but responsibility doesn't exist in a vacuum. When systems are designed to exploit these known vulnerabilities, the burden shouldn't fall entirely on the person struggling. Real accountability means empowering individuals and questioning environments that make this whole concept of self-control harder the moment someone becomes vulnerable. And because we don't know if or when formal regulation is coming, just like you said, that's exactly why self-regulation is so important. In the absence of clear rules, clear guidelines, the responsibility ends up falling on the hobby as a whole, the platforms, the breakers, the creators, and even the collecting community itself to set these standards around things like transparency, pacing, care, support. Self-regulation isn't about restriction or, overreach. It's about recognizing these risks early enough and choosing just, to slow things down before harm forces someone else to step in. So when a community shows it can protect its own people, it builds trust, and that's how I think the hobby sustains itself long term. So I think it's just a matter of, maturity. It's a matter of getting to a point where the hobby recognizes as a whole, the platforms, the manufacturers, not to throw out any specific names, but the powers that be, the Michael Rubins of the world, start to acknowledge what this is for what it is and implement changes accordingly.
Yeah, I think something that's missing in a lot of in a lot of at a lot of levels is just simple empathy.
Yeah.
Being aware that, yeah, it's one thing about being profit driven, but there's another thing to actually wanting to sustain this whole ecosystem and grow the hobby. But maybe they're just looking at, net numbers. If we add 100 and lose 50, well, good for the bottom line, because 100 new people, but or 50 net new, but those 50 that we're losing, you could have destroyed some lives along the way.
Yeah.
And so empathy, I think, is missing.
Yeah.
Among certain individuals and entities within the ecosystem.
Yeah. We kind of covered, a lot of what my next question ties into, but there is a lot of pushback, obviously, around these conversations, right? Not just with adults should know better or be more responsible, but people saying things like everything can be addictive or anything in excess can be potentially dangerous or unhealthy. Of course, people saying like it's not the hobby's job, it's not the breaker's job to control people's purchasing decisions. But again, in a frictionless environment, that becomes close to impossible when there's no limitations. There's no way to slow yourself down when you're feeling that sense of urgency. Do you?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, I mean, you said it's not the hobby's job. The job of these entities is very singular. It's to create profits, to drive shareholder value. That's the really only job of the of any company. That's their job. But then it comes down to the morals and the ethics and the mission of these companies. There are some companies, and it's become very trendy in the past 10 or 15 years to have a triple bottom line approach, where that third one, I can't even think of people, profit, and then it's like environment, as social responsibility being that third one.
Right.
And I just don't know how many companies in our space pay any attention to that. Some do, for sure. There are some very ethical companies out there, breakers, if we're just talking about, to speak about breakers. But there are some that are just focused on the bottom line, which is, the shareholder value is probably the number one motivating driver in business. So to say that, it's the hobby's job or not, whether it is or isn't the hobby's job to look out for people who might be at risk of, losing their financial resources, it's tough. I understand the pushback that you've been getting. I do understand that. I see where it's coming from, but that's where, just again, empathy and ethics come into play. And what are we here on earth to do? Or are we here to help people, or are we here to hurt people? And the world is a very strange place right now, where it seems like hurting people is just a-okay. There's lots of bullying in this world online, tons online. There's a lot of bullying online in our hobby, and a lot of these bullies are championed. And I'm, there's a difference between a bully and a watchdog. We have bullies in our hobby. That it's sad. It's just sad.
Yeah.
That's just the state of society right now.
Yeah. I mean, people just want to sort of benefit, capitalize on other people's shortcomings. And that's what we see with this online bullying that you're referencing. But I also want to talk about, like, you talked about the hobby and whether or not, it should self-regulate, or if it should add, protection for the consumers. I want to take a step back, because when any industry involves potential risk or harm, whether it's casinos, alcohol, cigarettes, or anything tied to vice, there's an understanding that responsibility can't rest solely on the individual, right? These matured industries, we'll use the word matured again, acknowledge at least to some level that when profit is connected to human vulnerability, companies have a role to play. That's why casinos have self-exclusion programs. That's why alcohol companies fund things like awareness campaigns. That's why cigarette packs carry warning labels. None of those, eliminate personal responsibility, but what they do is recognize the reality. People don't always engage from a perfectly rational standpoint, especially when things like emotion, stress, or addiction could potentially be involved. So corporate responsibility, and that's, sort of a buzz terminology that we use often. It isn't about banning products or shaming customers per se. It's about transparency, informed consent, and reducing preventable harm. It's acknowledging that if you benefit from engagement, you also share the responsibility for the downstream impact of how that engagement is designed and encouraged. So when industries ignore that responsibility altogether, the burden shifts entirely onto the individuals. And that's usually when real harm starts to escalate. So, I think just sustainable ecosystems, especially those built around high engagement and money, which, is the hobby through and through, they only last long term when companies accept that protecting people is part of the cost of doing business, not an
Well,
obstacle to it.
right, but that's the thing. It's the cost of doing business. Like, is putting a warning label on a cigarette pack something that the cigarette manufacturer wants to do? Absolutely not.
Right.
I don't think they do it because they're forced to, or they do it for social or political capital. Same thing. That's why they're, in many cases, that's why they're doing it. Yeah, there might be an executive or two and in the C-suite that maybe understands the significant impact and might put humanity ahead of profit. But shareholders, when they're reading their quarterly and annual reports, if they're even reading them, they're not so concerned. In many cases, if they're that concerned, they will sell those shares and not be invested in a company that might put people at risk. When you were listing off industries that have to have some corporate responsibility, like the automobile industry is another one. Like they're people die from vehicles every day, and you can there can be damage done from many products. As society has evolved, more and more people are dying from more and more things. Convenience causes problems for people. Convenient food. Look at the obesity rates now in the United States, especially. I mean, it's who's taking responsibility there? People can no one is anyone telling you to stop eat when you go to the all-you-can-eat buffet? I mean, maybe they are because they don't want to lose profit, but you can go in and you can just pig out all you want.
Right.
So I think a lot of these companies, while they may forwardly appear to care, I think that's just part of, like you said, it's a cost of doing business now, and they recognize that even before they go into business in many cases, rather than them actually caring so much. Although I recognize there might be a few people that do within these organizations.
Yeah, I mean, those are really excellent points. Anything in excess, like I said before, is potentially harmful, is potentially dangerous. I think there are layers to it. I think when it's like something like the hobby, which is really, in the grand scheme of things, low-hanging fruit in terms of potential risk, potential harm. I don't know if low-hanging fruit is the best expression there, but you get what I'm saying. I think a part of the problem is that the powers that be, they don't want to acknowledge the issues at play. They don't want to acknowledge the synergies between the hobby, card collecting, and gambling, traditional gambling, because once they do that, it opens Pandora's box. And they know that, by acknowledging it on their own, it, indirectly creates an opportunity for a third-party agency or entity to come in and start regulating. And why would, like you just said, like, why would they do that if they don't have to, if they're not being forced to? So again, it all sort of ties back to this concept of self-regulation. We don't know if any of that is coming. No government official or legislator wants to get involved in this, because when they look at it at face value, all they see is a childhood hobby. mean, we're talking about Pokemon and Disney and Marvel and SpongeBob, not just the sports cards. So it's definitely a gray area, and it's tough to compare it to other, vices, especially like some of the ones that you mentioned, cars, food. Yeah, of course, pretty much anything that we consume on a daily basis, like you said, anything that offers convenience is going to have inherent risks. I think it's just a matter of determining what the value versus risk, looks like. And I think for something like card collecting, which obviously in the modern hobby, the average collector has just been completely priced out. It has just become overwhelming. It has become something that is, not realistic for the average consumer to be a part of unless they set some personal boundaries. So yeah, at Collectors MD, we say this a lot. Environment influences behavior. Friction isn't punishment, it's protection. And awareness doesn't remove agency, it restores it.
Maybe a sort of solution or an angle here for people, members of Collectors MD, people who sit in on your meetings. It's almost like I don't know that we're going to change the industry. I don't think Collectors MD is going to change the industry, but I think what you're trying to do is really important, and it's really great, which is helping people change their own behaviors and their own reactions to things, and just providing support for a support group is really important. So yeah, all we can do is make the best in the environment that we are in. And you're doing a great job at that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I mean, I always say we're not trying to change the hobby. We obviously want to advocate for reform and, push for more awareness and education, but that's not even our jurisdiction. Our jurisdiction is to help people who need the real support right now. The same way Gamblers Anonymous, AA, NA, they operate in their own lanes. They're not sitting at the intersection of the casino and, the sports books. I mean, I guess when you talk about 800 Gambler, who by the way we recently partnered with, they live inside the systems to some extent. They're part of the warning labels. They're part of the brand messaging and the corporate responsibility. But at the same time, it's not because they're promoting the behavior or, actively involved in reform or change. It's because they're reaching the individuals who potentially need the help. And you can't make noise by standing on the out, or you can't help shift culture or support people by standing on the outside. You have to be at the center of the conversation. But again, doing so within your own lane, your own vertical. And that's sort of what we're trying to replicate with Collectors MD. So with that, I want to switch over to the next segment 3, which is the hobby spectrum, your platform, mapping out the risks without judgment. So why did you feel the need to create a framework to map different collecting behaviors?
Again, it started what I said at the beginning. I didn't necessarily feel the need until it happened. I'm a person, Alex, where I believe that I don't like to plan out too far. Okay. I think that I can't predict what's going to happen. Every decision we make can literally change the future course of our lives. So I started out with the intention of coming up with a survey, an assessment to figure out, where do I fall on that collector investor spectrum? And let me just go to the home page here and I'll show you. So it's about identity. It's really about discovering your collector identity. This is the home page of thehobbyspectrum.com. And I didn't this is even a little bit ahead of where I was going to start with talking, but I wanted to create this assessment so that, again, I often say collector, investor, we all fit somewhere along this collector investor spectrum, but this hasn't been defined. There's no formal framework around it. And I asked the question, what would I ask another collector or hobbyist? What could I ask them to find out where they fell on that collector investor spectrum, which is, again, just an abstract concept. And that led to what became a 50-question diagnostic assessment that is backed by psychology and behavioral science. It focuses in on mindset, motivation, and behavior. And each of the questions have a specific purpose within arriving at the final assessment. So you You take the survey on the platform and it puts you into one of these 7 archetypes, which have been developed, as you can see on the screen right now. And it gives you a score. Basically, a score it's not a score, because score almost implies that that a higher number is better, or like in golf, a lower number is better. But really, it's a placement along the spectrum. Like if I go to the about page here, you can see there's the spectrum itself, and everybody falls somewhere along here after you complete the assessment. So I wanted to just figure out, where do I fall? Where do the guests on my show? I want, hey, everybody, please welcome Alyx Efron to Sports Cards Live. He falls, he's a precisionist, and he's a 38 on this collector investor spectrum sort of thing. Welcome to the show, Alyx. You know, that would be something fun to do. It would just give us a shared language for what is a very misunderstood hobby. I'm not saying from the outside. I mean, we are misunderstood as collectors. I don't know what's going through your mind until I dig into it for in a lengthy conversation. And so it became, at first it was just going to be a survey that I would have attached as a tab on my sportscardslive.com website. And then I realized, as I was iterating on it, that this is bigger than just being a tab on Sports Cards Live website. This is its own thing that could really be useful to the whole hobby. So I went down the journey of creating its own platform, and the survey then led me to developing these archetypes, which, you know, just sort of naturally fell into place. If you have a spectrum from 0 to 100, you have to divide that up somehow if we're going to fall in. What are the buckets? So we developed these seven archetypes with the understanding that there is an almost infinite amount of ways to approach the hobby. We talked about that earlier too, Alyx, here in this episode, in this conversation. So this framework doesn't imply that you are only, you know, if I go back to the homepage, you are only one of these. You're only a builder or an operator or a tycoon or a hybrid, precisionist, nostalgic, or purist. No, we all dip our toes in sometimes many of these 7 archetypes, but we have a dominant one. We have a core one, I think, and that's what this focuses in on for now. So it was really just, again, providing this shared language for a fragmented hobby. That's kind of was the original motivation, and just for my own understanding of things, wanting to understand what is this collector investor spectrum that I've referred to hundreds of times on my shows, talking to the audience and my guests about. So that was the motivation behind creating it. But when I said before, I don't believe in planning ahead, it's become more than just an assessment or a survey. It's now become a discoverability tool. And that's the page that you landed on at the beginning. Once you take the assessment and you get your score, you get your archetype, you get a lengthy summary of what it means to be one of these archetypes, you can then opt in to joining the directory. And that's where I think the real magic is happening, where this thing is actually going to become a hobby tool. It's twofold. Well, it's threefold. Discover your hobby identity, discover like-minded other collectors, and be discovered is the third one. And that's what the directory is. So can I show you the directory now? Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So if you move over to the directory, this shows everybody who has taken the assessment and opted in. We have 427 people who've gone through that process so far in, I think it's exactly about a month today. And it's all by access code. This is not open to the public yet. We're still in trial beta. We're making tweaks, but you can go to the hobbyspectrum.com right now, and if you don't have an access code, you can request one. You'll get one within 24 hours, and then you can go and do the assessment, opt into the directory. But as this idea was evolving, I thought, like, what's a directory going to look like? And I worked with a software development company to build this, and one of the things I realized was, like, this can be a connectivity tool, discoverability tool. So I thought, well, why don't we let people add all their links? So just take somebody at random here, all season rips here. You click on here and you can go directly to their Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and to their eBay store just by clicking on any of these, right? If I were to click on his eBay store as an example, it's going to bring up his eBay store. You know, if I click on his Instagram, it's going to bring up his Instagram account eventually, and then I can follow him on Instagram. So, and then the nice thing is that all the colors represent one of the archetypes. So it's long. Like I can scroll for a while here to get through 427. But if I just want to see all the operators, I go to just a random operator, click on operator. Now I see all the operators. And then I can sort them by score and see who the highest scoring operator is, who's the closest to being why didn't that work? Hold on. Oh, I'm starting from the low, 72. So here's the higher score. Lefty McKee is an 85. If I click on 85, I see all the 85s as well. So it's kind of neat. I can just go through this by join most recent. I'm the first one to join it. If I go the other way, I can just go through and find everyone who has an Instagram and go click on that, have a look at their collection, their page, and decide if I want to follow them at all. And you can input all sorts of different links. Like if you go to myself, and I was the first one to do this, you can see I've got all my social media, my podcast links, my hobby platforms. Then you can add other links. So here you can actually add collectorsmd.com. You can add, if you've, Alex, for example, you've had guests on your podcast, maybe they don't have their own social platform. They could link to their interview with you, that YouTube video. Now they can be discovered. It's almost like an online business card, if you will, but everything links to wherever you want. And there's no real limits to it. So
it's like it's like a yellow book for the hobby.
Yeah. And we're right now, you're adding social links, but we're in development right now before we go public with this and take the gate off the front of the website to be able to add what you collect as well. Players, teams, and sports. We're going to be adding that. But if you're a business, you can link to that. You can link to whatever it is, wherever you want to be discovered, you can add the link to it. So it's called the Spectrum Directory, but as I think it was Teapot from Market Movers and Sports Card Investor said on one of his videos he did about this, he said, I look at this as being the hobby directory. And I thought, well, that's
a yellow book. I meant yellow pages, which is a directory of sorts. And I think it's a really great way to allow people to come together and find like-minded collectors who share similar passion points or are in the hobby for particular reasons and connect with one another. So I think there's a lot of utility here, and I think there will be opportunity to grow this and scale it to the point where it's its own community as well, where people can come here and interact with one another within the platform itself.
Well, however, one thing on that, Alex, I appreciate that, but one thing I was very careful about was not to build a new social media platform, because we are all so comfortable on our platforms of choice, whether you live on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, wherever. I don't think we don't want to compete with that. We would rather help people use their native platforms more efficiently and just in a better way, more effectively, to build their communities on there. I've had people reach out to me. One guy in particular said, "Thank you so much for doing this, Jeremy. I'm having so much fun going through and finding other accounts on Instagram to follow, and I'm checking out their collections and really loving it." Some people have said to me, "Hey, I want to start a group chat for the purists or people that scored the same as me." I mean, that's also cool, So it's about inclusivity. It's not about pitting different groups against each other. This is an ecosystem. There's a spot for everybody in there. And I so far it's the response has been overwhelmingly motivating for me to keep this going.
Yeah, and there certainly are a lot of synergies between your mission, your approach, and your vision of how you see this having an impact on the hobby and everything we're doing at Collectors MD. When you first brought it to my attention, you mentioned the whole concept of collecting with intention and figuring out why you're collecting in the first place. And I think it can really help collectors do that. I absolutely will finish my assessment. I started it recently, and we'll get Collectors MD up on there with all the links, and really excited to be a part of the early stages of your development and growth with this. Did I see David Wright at the top of the directory? Is that the actual David Wright baseball player? I mean, it is a common name.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look.
Wouldn't that be something if it was the former Met? No.
Not that. Not that David Wright says so. No.
and he's a purist, which is blue, which is the color of the Mets. So right next
That's
to orange too.
Can I say, Alex? Can I just share one more thing about this thing? Because
of course.
Because when you have a spectrum like this, some people might think that it's all about lateral movement along the spectrum, but it really isn't. There's no one archetype that is better than the other. It is what it is. I say, like, take pride in your position, take pride in the archetype that you are in. But with that said, there is the ability to progress within the archetype. I call it the maturity progression sort of scale. And we're going to be adding that to it because, you know, you can be a hybrid, but you can be new to the hobby, or you can be 50 years in the hobby. And so it's not really about aspirationalism here. With that said, though, it might open your eyes to other ways to approach the hobby. And I think there's tie-ins there for the Collectors MD mission to find the find a way. You may not even know how you can approach the hobby that is healthier for you. And I think that the hobby spectrum can open people's eyes to new ways to approach the hobby and see, look at all these people that do it this way. Maybe I can learn from them. Maybe I go to the directory and I reach out to somebody and say, hey, I really like your collection. How did you do that? What do you recommend? Like, let's help each other out. Let's support each other, which is what Collectors MD is doing. And that's why I immediately, after being involved with you and learning about you, I knew that there were synergies between the two platforms. And so I just wanted to really make it obvious that it's not about trying to be something that you're not, but it can be about that too if you want to change.
Sure. Yeah. I love it. I think it's got it's got real potential to become a mainstay in the hobby, and I definitely am confident that the right person is behind it too. So you're going to help propel this forward, and I think it's going to become ubiquitous with the hobby in a lot of ways. And another thought I just had is that you are going to potentially be sitting on a wealth of data around hobby tendencies, collector tendencies, things like that. And another thought I just had is that this also could be ubiquitous to all verticals, all categories of collecting, not just sports cards. Is that your intention as far as like long-term vision?
So I'm a sports card guy, person. I am not into TCG. I don't collect memorabilia that much. I don't collect tickets. I don't collect really. It's sports cards for me. But I do recognize that this would be a good platform perhaps for the TCG world.
Sure.
So I've actually met with a TCG expert and shared the concept with them and let them know that there is the opportunity to mirror this for that community. But the survey, the assessment is really written with sports card collectors in mind. It's not written with any collector in mind. So I do recognize, though, that there is the ability to stretch this out to other collector communities. But my personal love and passion is sports cards. So that's what I'm focused on exclusively right now. But I think you're definitely right. There is the opportunity for other verticals.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I really appreciate about this platform is that it's not like diagnostic or prescriptive. It's really awareness first, really self-awareness. So how do you feel like tools like this change behavior without removing choice?
Just by opening your eyes to understanding even yourself. Now, when you complete the assessment, Alex, yourself, once you do it, you're going to receive your score, your archetype, and you're going to receive about a 500-word write-up, profile description about your archetype. I want you to, I can't wait for you to read that and see what it says.
Yeah.
I had a discussion the other day with Brian Dennison, Cajun Cardboard, who had done it, and he said that it explained him perfectly. And I was like, well, that's music to my ears. So it's not it's not diagnostic, but there's a bit of like fortune telling to it, I guess you could say, because again, there's only 7 of these and there's a billion ways to do this thing.
Yeah.
So it's not going to, not every word in that description is going to resonate with everybody. But if it's an 80% hit rate, that's pretty strong. So it's really about, if you read that, you may have a good understanding about it. Now, it's not going to bring into account the degree to which you are apt to gamble within the hobby and to risk financial resources and mental stability. I don't know if that's the right term, but I think I hope you know what I'm getting at. It's going to, however, eventually, Alex, we have add-ons, additional layers, modifications coming to your profile, because again, there's a billion ways to do this, not 7. So there are like 7 or 8 other subspectrums coming that will modify your profile on your identity card here. And one of them is going to be the gambler spectrum. I don't know if that's what we're going to call it, but that's coming. How prone are you to breaking, to getting caught up in the heat of the moment? And I'm probably going to need you, Alex, to help consult me on that particular subspectrum, because and that's going to be a part of it. I had someone reach out to me just yesterday after completing it who said, one thing that was missing was breaking. I consider breaking to be about 50% of my collecting. And I said to him, understood, this is not all encompassing. It can't be. It just can't be. There's too many ways to do this. Right. But the gambler spectrum is coming as a modification to the overall platform. So
right. And you'll grow it and you'll adapt based on feedback. And we'll definitely see new iterations and versions of this coming out, I'm sure, in the coming weeks and coming months. But the whole idea, the concept itself, tools as mirrors and ways to practice intention by understanding your archetype, all of that just aligns so deeply with how we think about support and the hobby as a whole. So kudos to you. We can obviously unpack this for hours. Yeah. There's so many directions that we can go in terms of just, understanding the scope of everything you've built here. But I do want to keep us on track. We have 2 more segments. So I want to shift over to your book. And so Jeremy, for those listening, has authored a book. It's coming out soon. I'm really excited to read it. And I want to know what pushed you to put all of your experience as a collector into words instead of just keeping it as conversations and observations.
Well, it's, how I said, like, one thing leads to another. You can't really plan for these things. That's what happened with the book as well. The book is actually a spin-off of the hobby spectrum. And what I mean was, I mentioned to you that I said 7 or 8, it might be 8 or 9 additional modifying spectrums coming to the core collector investor spectrum module, let's say. One night on my late night walk after a show, when we were talking about comps, which is, there's a whole comp economy in our hobby now, I was thinking to myself, comps are not all created equal. They exist on a spectrum as well. Oh, right. Spectrum. Maybe this is another spectrum for my hobby spectrum project. But I realized pretty quickly, like that same evening, that the hobby spectrum is about like internal discovery, where comps is all external data. It's just external data and occurrences. So it's not the same thing. And then I started thinking about what comps are. Well, comps are really the demand side of the hobby. The supply side is what we refer to in a convenient term as pops, populations. And that also includes like print runs and basically supply. So I thought to myself, this has nothing to do with the hobby spectrum as it is. This is something different. And maybe this is, how can I get this out there? And I thought about doing videos about it. And I thought, well, maybe this is an opportunity to write a book about something, because there's a lot there. And the title of the book just naturally jumped into my head, being Pops and Comps. And that's the title of the book. And I really quickly realized when the manuscript was at about 22,000 words, I realized that this is an opportunity to really build out what I'm going to address in the book, and not just be about comps and not just be about population reports, but being about grading and being about supply and demand and psychology and strategy. And the table of contents went from like 8 chapters to it's 82 chapters now and 7 appendices. It just kept on building, Alex, because I go on my nightly walks pretty much 5 to 7 nights a week. I listen to podcasts or I listen to music and my mind just races. I go out after I do a live stream, which, you know, happens 2 to 4 times a week, let's say. And the ideas kept on flowing. And I'd record a voice note. I'd come back to my desk and I'd start iterating on these topics. And the book just expanded. And so it's called Pops and Comps. And the subtitle is Truths, Insights, and Psychology Behind the Numbers That Drive the Sports Card Market. And I'm proud to let you know that in the front matter of the book, there's a couple paragraphs called A Note on Balance in the Hobby. And because I think it's important to put that, to preface that before we get into the meat and matter of the book itself, or before the book gets there. Right. And Collectors MD is referenced in there as, you know, just a resource out there if you are finding yourself at risk. And I'm really proud to be able to do that. So that it's a spin-off of the Hobby Spectrum. It doesn't happen if I don't do my show. But in doing it, it gave me the opportunity to tell my story, my origin story a little bit, share my insights, my experience in the hobby. And it's built on not just my insights and experience, but the conversations I've had at card shows for the last 20 years, as well as the 300 plus people who've come through my studio in the last 6 years, and learning from them, as well as consuming all the content that I do consume myself and getting ideas. It's not a one-man show. Many people, whether it's mentioned in the book or not, because I don't even, it's subconscious in many ways, have contributed to the ideas in there as well. So there you go.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's so impressive that you've been able to take your experiences. You said you've been in the hobby for how many years? 46?
This year I started in 1980.
Wow. Yeah. And you know, all of that has culminated into not just a live platform and the Hobby Spectrum, but a physical book. And by the way, I'm just so humbled and grateful that you're including Collectors MD as part of that, especially because, you know, you only met me this past year. I think in July was when I came on your show. So we've definitely come a long way in a short time. And it is just, you know, really inspiring to see some of the work that you're doing in this space. You're one of the most, I think, respected voices within the hobby, and you know, putting a lot of what you've experienced, what you've observed, into tangible resources that people can access, use, and take with them as part of their continued collecting journeys, I think is just an amazing thing.
Well, I appreciate that. I think what you're doing is extremely important. What a lot of people don't know is that I, in 2020, lost my brother to addiction, actually. And so it's really important to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry for your loss, Jeremy. You know, it's really, really tough. It's so hard. And you don't truly understand the magnitude unless you've experienced it yourself, or you've known somebody firsthand that has gone through the struggles. So yeah, it just really means a lot that you're part of this movement. So with that, I want to come full circle. We are going to finish with our final segment, which is leadership, guardrails, and the future of the hobby. We're still largely unregulated as a hobby. So, you know, responsibility obviously doesn't wait for regulation. So what do you think leadership looks like in a space like this? Actually, you know what? I should say, what do you think leadership should look like?
Just putting your money where your mouth is, and actually caring about the people that are at risk. You know, what does that look like? It's communication, it's education, it's sharing the message. Yeah, it's people who are in a position that it's like, if just to the analogy to the casino, it's for the dealers and the pit bosses of our hobby
Yeah.
to be aware and look out for somebody who is exhibiting behavior that might not be good for their health, for mental health, physical health, financial health.
Yeah.
Caring about your customer, putting humanity ahead of profit, which is not the way the world is, unfortunately. I think the world has tried to get that way in many ways. We see a lot of companies that, for every pair of shoes we sell, we're going to send one to third world country, sort of thing. We're seeing that social responsibility in corporate America more and more now, but at the same time, I think we're seeing more and more predatory behaviors as well. It's like we're just becoming more and more binary that way.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good question, Alex. But yeah, that's kind of my answer. I don't have the perfect solution, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, you brought up the fact that a lot of companies are trying their best to do their part to look out for people, because they understand and acknowledge that at the end of the day, we're all human, and it's so important to look out for one another in some capacity. The cynical side of me hopes that, a lot of these companies are doing those things for the right reasons, and the messaging is truly authentic and genuine, and they're not just doing it to look good or to be part of something that has become increasingly popular. So yeah, I mean, I think that can apply to the hobby in a great way, and something that I've been bringing to the table in terms of bringing break groups and card shops on board with the Rip Responsibly campaign is telling them, look, it's a really good look when you look out for your customer. And when your customer sees that, sure, talking about ripping responsibly and setting budgets and staying within your means might limit immediate revenue, but over time, you are going to be able to sustain a loyal customer base because you've acknowledged and you're telling them, you're showing them that you care about their mental health, their well-being, and their financial, well-being as well. So what role do you think that like some of these hosts, the breakers across these platforms and even educators play in setting norms, even without these formal rules in place?
They're the voices of their micro communities within the overall collecting community. They are the voices. They are the ones who have the power to spread the message. It's so important. I think that it's we talk about the online breaking platforms as online casinos, but walking into an LCS has walking into the casino vibes as well. You're presented with a menu of very colorful products you can buy and open right there and
Right.
get that instant gratification or instant depression
Right.
after you spend that money. So the hobby is I don't know any other consumer product industry that is a community like we are. Nothing comes to mind for me. You've got people that collect cars and they meet you got Sturgis for the motorcycle guys. You have industry conferences and all these things for many, but we are like an amazing cross section of society in this sports card world. It's a place that you can escape the realities of politics, religion, all those other divisive types of things. And so as the community, there are certain voices who are in very important positions. And I think that and not just voices, but all just like environments, like putting up signs and warning labels, those sorts of things. It's just so important to not prey on people who are, predisposed to being preyed upon. And I think leadership comes from that. I like what you said. It's about it's deferred revenue in a way. Put the community at the forefront, put the people at the forefront, and you will, I think, build a lasting business in this hobby, because people are going to know that this is a business that I want to be associated with. I want to give them my money. I want to buy from them because they care about the community and the individuals within it.
Yeah, really well said. Do you believe that guardrails can coexist with entertainment?
Why not? I would say why can't they? Not even guardrail. Like there are apps you can put on your phone to remove apps from your phone or keep you from having apps on. I know you talk about these in your meetings. You know, why not? Why couldn't the online casinos in our hobby, the breaking live stream platforms, why couldn't they say, hey, you have spent the most you've ever spent ever, or you've spent 15% more than you spent last week already. Do you want to think twice? Have to push that extra button. Whatever those warnings are. I'm trying to be creative on the fly here, but or you could set limits for yourself in the app, and then hey, you've hit your limit for today. Those things, and not just on those apps, on any auction type app, any app where you're spending money. I think that they could implement certain controls just to remind you that you might be getting out of hand because the breaker's busy. The breaker doesn't see you. If you're a bartender, you see the customer. You can visibly see, even while you're serving another customer or pouring a drink, you can see somebody getting out of hand or kind of getting into a state where they're too drunk.
Right.
You can't see your customer in these online platforms. So the platform itself needs some sort of guardrail. Yeah. However, an LCS can easily see somebody because it's like the bar, and there's probably not as many people in there in many cases. So you can see somebody and you can see the depression setting in. I mean, I lived it myself. I would just be like, oh, okay, one more box of the cup for $500. Okay, let's do it. And that happened to me in 2008. I remember doing that, leaving the shop, feeling like I was leaving a casino after dumping a couple grand at the blackjack table. Yeah. It was the same feeling. So I know that opening product is akin to gambling. And some people say, yeah, but you leave with something. Come on. That's such BS.
It is.
You leave with something. Big deal. I dropped $2,000. I have $200 worth of stuff. Yeah. I still lost $1,800.
Right.
So don't give me that BS. Come on.
Yeah. It is important to acknowledge, because you talked about the LCS experience. Again, there are steps to doing that. You have to make the decision. I'm going to go to my LCS right now, get in the car, physically drive there, transact with somebody in person, hand over cash or your credit card, sit down, open the product. Maybe you leave, you go home to open it, whatever the case may be. In the digital environment, all of that, and the same thing applies to physically going to a casino versus playing on your phone. Think about the idea of like sitting at a card shop, ripping box after box in front of maybe the manager or other customers. There's a layer of humility, and maybe you might feel a little bit ashamed or embarrassed to be doing something like that in front of other people. Whereas like from the comfort of your own home, you could essentially hide behind a username or a handle. And again, it's just so frictionless in terms of being able to make these purchases like over and over again. I love the point you brought up that, it's like being a bartender, and yeah, you see all these different faces coming at you left and right, and you're serving the drinks, but you're not really keeping a tally as to like what this guy, has been drinking or how many drinks, this woman has had. So it's definitely challenging when the breaker, especially if they have a high volume of individuals in the room, to keep tabs of that and then to remind them, hey, you've spent over your limit. But at the same time, when you have somebody come in and spend 5 figures in a matter of 3 minutes, it's like, well, let's take a step back here and evaluate this individual, this customer. So I love the point you brought up, and I don't see why platforms can't do this. They exist within casino apps where you get a pop-up. Hey, you've spent, an hour and a half. Just a reminder, you've spent an hour and a half in the app, or, you've spent X amount, and then allow you to set daily, weekly, monthly deposit limits, or take a timeout, cool off period if you need to. Guardrails like that don't cancel the fun. They don't take away from, potential opportunity, because what it does is it slows down the churn, right? There's so much churn on apps like Whatnot and Fanatics Live and Loop and eBay. People come in, like you said, they get rinsed, they leave, they say, screw this, I'm never going to do it again. When somebody leaves the hobby because they're disgruntled, because they feel like they lost, they just end up replacing that person with 2 more people. Why don't we try to retain those customers by offering them opportunity to stay long term, feel like they're in a safe environment, and not just getting cleaned hand over fist every single time they open the app? So
yeah. I just the issue there that I see though, Alex, is that we call them customers. We're not calling them collectors, and there's a different thing there, right? Because if you're just going there for the adrenaline, you might not be a collector. You might just be a gambler, and you might not convert to a collector. But I think you can. I think you can, because it's such a fun hobby, and these cards are so awesome that maybe the leadership or some sort of program is to, like, how do we convert gambling behavior to collecting behavior and managed collecting behavior, because you can be an addicted collector as well, I would say. And I don't know how you do that exactly, but I think it's by education and by consuming good content, collector focused content. And something where my Hobby Spectrum platform could actually be helpful. Like, go follow a bunch of purists, go follow a bunch of nostalgics and see how they approach the hobby. Open your eyes to other ways to enjoy this thing without having to put your mental and financial health at risk, and then your physical health as well, because they're all one big system. So I
think it's really important to also call out that there are collectors who, stay within their means. They know what they're getting themselves into. They know a box, might cost them a couple $1,000s, and there's a high likelihood that they're going to walk away with a fraction of that in terms of value. But they're doing it, A, because they enjoy the experience, or B, they don't really care about the monetary value of what cards they hit. It might be a $2,000 box. They might hit a card of their favorite player. It might only be worth like $50 to $100, but that experience alone and the memory of hitting that card, whether it be with friends, family, whatever, is worth it to them. It's invaluable, so to speak. And I think a good example, and this is an interesting one. Did you see the video that Shine posted with Kevin O'Leary the other day, where they were at a restaurant opening up? It wasn't Exquisite. It was the other Upper Deck product that was super popular in the mid 2000s.
I did not get past the first 15 seconds of that. I did see it, but I didn't get past the first 15 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, I understand like content like that can be a bit polarizing.
Watching billionaires open product is obviously money for them is a non-starter. Like, they don't even need to think about how much money they're spending on that kind of box. But they're nonetheless sitting at the table opening up a box of sports cards because they enjoy the experience of it, and they got excited over hitting. I forget exactly what autograph they hit. It was it wasn't Karl Malone. It was, I don't know, one of the big popular forwards during the mid 2000s. Anyway, they obviously were chasing after the Michael Jordan, the Kobe Bryant, the LeBron James, but they were okay with, throwing away $60,000 or however much the case costs. Again, can't really compare that to the average collector because these are billionaires we're talking about. But again, they were clearly showcasing that they were doing that as part of an experience together to enjoy it. And I did appreciate that. I appreciated that they made a point to get that point across. I think staying within your means is super important in the hobby. Obviously, you talk about the breaking experience, and I think about all these fathers and mothers opening cards with their sons and daughters, and they're looking for hits. And I just wonder how much of that is conditioning these kids to look for the hit, the adrenaline hit, and the
part of
hit
the
you get from hitting blackjack or getting dealt a great hand, whatever it is. I don't know. On the flip side, though, as a collector and somebody who doesn't open up wax or join breaks, I'm grateful that people are doing that because it's releasing cards into the wild that I can go buy on the secondary market. Yet I realize that my gratefulness might be at someone else's expense. You know, am I getting that card from somebody who just lost their family because they had to liquidate after losing their family's savings account?
That's a great
point. So it's a weird dichotomy that we're caught in as collectors when the people feeding us our cards might be suffering. So
yeah,
that's a whole other thing.
That's actually something Jeff Wilson brought up when I had him on the show was, you know, if breaking didn't exist, then a lot of the cards that people purchase on the secondary market wouldn't be in circulation. Breaking is essential for high volume product openings. So it has to exist in some capacity in order for the hobby to sustain the long term. Otherwise, you know, product would just sit, you know, in sealed wax forever, indefinitely. So I get that point, but I do like the fact that you just brought up, am I buying this card at the expense of somebody else, you know, chasing it and now just trying to make back a fraction of what they lost? Like, that shows the empathetic side, you know, and that's really, really important to think about too. It's such a tough balance. You know, you brought up the concept of chasing the hit and conditioning young, impressionable, and uneducated collectors that the hit is the only thing that matters, when that shouldn't be the case. You know, that's part of the mission. Part of what drives me and this movement is not just educating the collectors, but educating the parents, teaching them that, you know, if kids are collecting, they should be doing so for the right reasons, as opposed to just walking around these card shows, transacting, trying to trade up, and just ultimately doing it in order to make money. Which, you know, on one hand, it's good that these kids are learning business practices and how to, you know, conduct a formal business transaction at a young age. But at the same time, it's also preconditioning them to chase that dopamine hit, chase that high. And when kids learn that early on in life, that's when things start to, you know, escalate. And we're seeing more and more of it, you know, not just at Collectors MD, but as you know, I run a gambling addiction group on Monday nights and Tuesday nights at Right Choice Recovery here in Jersey. And we're seeing younger and younger people coming into these programs, into these meetings that need support, need real help. So it's a real problem. Obviously not just within the hobby and collecting, but other areas too. And gambling, real quick, I do want to address this. In the GA Yellow Book, when they talk about the definition of gambling, it's gambling for the compulsive gambler is defined as follows: any betting or wagering for self or others, whether for money or not, no matter how slight or insignificant, where the outcome is uncertain or depends upon chance or skill, constitutes gambling. And then in the beginning of the Yellow Book, and then we'll wrap up, but it talks about where is it? What is compulsive gambling? Compulsive gambling is an illness, progressive in its nature, which can never be cured, but can be arrested. Before coming to GA, many compulsive gamblers thought of themselves as morally weak, or at times just plain no good. The GA concept is that compulsive gamblers are really very sick people who can recover if they will follow to the best of their ability a simple program that has proven successful for thousands of other men and women with a gambling or compulsive gambling problem. What is the first thing a compulsive gambler ought to do in order to stop gambling? Trying to find where it talks about some of these other sort of adjacent activities beyond just traditional gambling. Anyway, it gets into things like day trading, you know, just any game of chance, playing dice with your friends, anything that involves an uncertain outcome, which obviously opening wax constitutes as gambling. So it's just important for people to recognize that and to be aware that if you're doing it in moderation and within your means, more power to you. I really respect that, but also realize that it's a slippery slope and it does come with potential risk and potential harm. So just make sure that you're staying self-aware. You're taking those moments of pause to just reevaluate, making sure that your activity, your actions are aligning with your values. And you're just asking yourself the constant, why am I doing this in the first place? And just making sure that aligns with, with your collecting journey.
Yeah, I think it's all really well said. I think one of the things that we can do is provide alternatives to just the games of chance in the hobby. And I mean, even buying a single is somewhat of a game of chance. You don't know if that value is going to go up or down, but you're building a collection. At least you know what you're going to spend, and you know exactly what you're going to get for your money. So, instead of just opening wax or buying the break spots, you could just build a collection, pick a player, pick a team, pick a sport, build yourself a collection if you want to be involved in the hobby. That may not speak as well to somebody who really just wants to gamble, but it may save some people a lot of grief down the road as well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Providing alternatives is something that leaders in the space can do.
Yeah. The whole concept, the belief that protecting collectors stabilizes the hobby, that feels like the through line here. That's what we're trying to do. So with that, we're going to transition over to our rapid fire reflection round. I'm going to ask you 8 questions. You're going to hit me with your first thought and honest thought. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. One habit every collector should build.
One habit every look at the card, not the grade.
Most misunderstood risk in the hobby.
And I'm gonna kind of go away from the whole breaking thing here, but population reports are wildly inaccurate.
One thing platforms overlook that matters most.
One thing platforms overlook that matters most. Ooh, I don't. Nothing's coming to mind, Alex.
Okay, we'll skip that one. A boundary you personally believe in.
Just live within your means. Don't put your food, shelter, and clothing at risk in order to buy sports cards.
Yeah, well said. One metric or behavior collectors should pay closer attention to.
A metric, sorry, this isn't so quick hit for me. A metric or behavior the collector should pay closer attention to. The print runs, non-serialized print runs. We just don't know how many cards are being printed, and what seems like an awesome card might be something that is going to be in the dollar bin down the road.
Where do you think most collectors honestly fall on the hobby spectrum?
So, okay, sorry for not quick hit, but right now as we're talking, I'm getting text messages from my developer who is sending, because we're adding a thing to the main page, which is showing the distribution. And I'm literally looking at this right now, showing me the distribution.
Oh, so you can see what the most popular one is.
Yeah, we're gonna deploy this more like right away here, probably as soon as we get off this call. And right now it's landing at the nostalgic is the biggest group of people. I would think that it's actually more to the right and likely more in that precisionist hybrid area if people are being completely honest with themselves. But who am I to say what that is? So yeah.
Awesome. One idea from your book you wish more collectors actually applied.
Oh gosh, I've got 80 chapters in that book or so, but it's gonna. Oh my gosh, Alex. Yeah, I had one before we went live, and it's not coming back to me right now so quickly. But I'm gonna go with comps are not all created equal, and they are simply many comps are simply decisions made by two people at a certain point in time in the past on a certain platform. Comps are very limited in what they are actually in their reliability.
Yeah. So volatile. And lastly, a conversation on sports cards live that changed how you see the hobby.
The funny thing is that I knew these questions ahead of time, but I'm not prepared for them. Gosh, I've had so many of these conversations over the years. But when I'm learning about something I'm not as aware of, those are some of my favorites. Again, I'm gonna have to take a pass. Nothing specific is coming to mind on this one, Alex. But even when you came on my show and I started to learn more about just how, yeah, like it's almost like I knew that the hobby was gambling. I remember gambling in the hobby, Alex, in 1985. I'm sorry for making this longer. When I needed one sticker left for my O-Pee-Chee hockey sticker album, and I'd take my $2 allowance to the corner store, get 8 packs, and not get that last one I needed, and how sad I felt in 1985. So, I mean, when there wasn't even Beckett magazines really at the time, and I still felt taken advantage of in a way. I felt so sad that I couldn't get that last. And it was Ken Morrow of the New York Islanders, and I couldn't find it. I already forget the question at this point, but yeah.
I remember you telling that story. No, it's all good. You've had some incredible conversations on the show, and I know how much that show means to a lot of people. So, Jeremy, this was an incredibly thoughtful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. What stands out to me is that none of this is about restriction. It's about clarity. Tools don't replace discipline. They support it. Awareness beats impulse. This isn't about collecting less. It's about collecting with intention, awareness, and control. If you want to learn more about Jeremy's work, check out Sports Cards Live on YouTube, The Hobby Spectrum at thehobbyspectrum.com, and his book, which is coming out very soon. All details are listed in the description below. And if anything in today's conversation resonated with you, whether it's about habits, pressure, or feeling overwhelmed, Collectors MD is here for you as a resource. We host peer support meetings every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern and a Thursday group in partnership with the Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado called Unboxed, powered by Collectors MD. All of our content, tools, and resources can be found at collectorsmd.com. Be sure to subscribe to the Collectors Compass on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and all major platforms, and check out our 2 other shows, Behind the Breaks and Collectors MD Features. I'm Alex Efron. This is the Collectors Compass, reminding you to collect with intention, not compulsion. We'll see you next time.